Six people. That's it. Six individuals own more combined wealth than 100 million of their fellow citizens. Not in some collapsed state. Not in a war zone. In Brazil, the 12th largest economy on Earth. A country with more billionaires than Canada. More natural resources than almost anywhere on the planet. So why are 13 million Brazilians living with no clean water right now? The answer isn't poverty. Brazil isn't poor. The answer is something more deliberate than that. And it goes back further than you think. Brazil is the 5th largest country on Earth. Largest economy in Latin America. A G20 nation sitting on top of the world's greatest concentration of natural wealth. The Amazon, offshore oil, agricultural land that feeds half the planet. By every measure, it should be a superpower lifting hundreds of millions into prosperity. Instead, it has become the most studied case of extreme inequality in modern history. This video breaks down exactly why. The colonial roots that never healed, the policy wins that were reversed, and what Brazil's story means for everywhere else. If this is the kind of content you've been looking for, subscribe to Global Uncovered right now and hit the bell. We cover the world without the filter. Now let's get into it. 6 people own more than 100 million. Not a metaphor. Brazil's actual wealth distribution in 2024. Brazil's GDP is $2.1 trillion. It is a G20 nation with a sophisticated financial sector, a booming agricultural export industry, and some of the most valuable natural resources on Earth. And yet its Gini coefficient, the global measure of how unevenly wealth is spread, sits at 0.53. Denmark is 0.28. Canada is 0.31. A score of 0.53 means wealth is so concentrated at the top that the richest 1% of Brazilians own more than half of everything in the country. The gap isn't just large. It was built this way deliberately, and the story of how starts 500 years ago. Look at this. This is what Brazil's inequality actually looks like compared to economies of similar size. The only major economy that comes close to Brazil's score is South Africa, another country whose inequality has direct roots in colonial extraction and racial segregation. That is not a coincidence, and it is not an accident. Both countries were designed to enrich a small group at the expense of everyone else. The question is how that design survives for centuries after the designers are gone. 1500, Portuguese ships arrive on the coast of what will become Brazil. They didn't come to build a country. They came to extract one. Sugar, gold, rubber, coffee. Brazil's entire early economy was engineered to funnel wealth out of the land and back to Europe. The people doing the work were enslaved Africans. Brazil imported more enslaved people than any other country in the Americas. An estimated 4.9 million, roughly 40% of everyone taken in the entire transatlantic slave trade. The last country in the Western world to abolish slavery. It did so in 1888, not out of moral awakening, because Britain pressured it to. But abolition wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the next chapter. Here is the part that changes everything. When slavery was abolished, the enslaved people of Brazil received nothing. No land, no reparations, no pathway into the economy. The colonial landowners kept their estates. The families who had built their wealth on enslaved labor simply continued owning everything, and everyone else started from zero. Brazil never had a land reform. The latifundio system, massive agricultural estates controlled by a tiny elite, survived colonialism, survived the republic, survived military dictatorship, and survives today. Approximately 1% of landowners control nearly half of all agricultural land in Brazil. The inequality you see in 2024 was not created by modern policy failures. It was inherited, protected, and compounded over 5 centuries. And then the military arrived and made it worse. Between 1964 and 1985, Brazil was governed by a military dictatorship. The regime pursued aggressive economic growth. GDP did expand rapidly during the so-called economic miracle of the 1970s. But the growth went almost entirely to the top. Wages for ordinary workers were suppressed by law. Union organizing was banned. Political opposition was imprisoned and tortured. By the time democracy returned in 1985, Brazil had a larger economy and a more entrenched inequality than when the generals took over. The dictatorship was gone. The system it protected was completely intact. and ordinary Brazilians were about to find out what that meant for their daily lives. There is a street in Sao Paulo that tells the whole story in one image. On one side, Paraisópolis, one of the largest favelas in Brazil, home to over 100,000 people. On the other side, Morumbi, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in South America, luxury high-rises with rooftop pools and private helipads. They share a wall. Residents of Morumbi look down from their balconies directly onto Paraisópolis. Children from Paraisópolis grow up watching a version of life 50 meters away that they have almost no statistical chance of ever reaching. This is not a metaphor. This is a street you can walk down today. And what happens on each side of that wall is almost a different country. In Brazil, your postcode determines almost everything. Born wealthy, private school, private doctor, gated community, private security. The public systems, schools, hospitals, police, exist almost exclusively for the poor, and they are chronically, deliberately underfunded. Brazil spends more on debt interest payments than on education and health combined. Public hospitals in favelas regularly run out of basic supplies. Public schools in poor municipalities have dropout rates above 40%. The result is a two-tier society so entrenched that moving up from the economic class you were born into is rarer in Brazil than in almost any other country that tracks the data. You don't escape where you started. In Brazil, where you start is almost always where you end up. Extreme inequality has a body count. Brazil consistently records between 40,000 and 50,000 homicides per year, more than the entire conflict death toll of many active war zones. The vast majority of victims are young, black, and poor. The vast majority live in favelas. This is not random violence. Research consistently shows that homicide rates track directly with inequality scores. When people have no legal pathway to economic participation, some find illegal ones. When the state abandons entire communities, those communities develop their own power structures. Violence in Brazil is not a crime problem. It is an inequality problem wearing a crime problem's face. In 2003, something remarkable happened. President Lula launched a program that became one of the most studied poverty interventions in human history. Bolsa Familia was simple. Families below the poverty line received monthly cash payments directly, on the condition that their children attended school and received vaccinations. No bureaucracy, no in-kind goods, just money, going straight to the people who needed it. By 2014, Bolsa Familia had lifted an estimated 28 million Brazilians out of extreme poverty. Brazil's Gini coefficient fell for the first time in decades. Child mortality dropped. School attendance rose. The world watched and replicated it across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. For the first time in its history, Brazil was actually reversing the damage. Then it stopped. Brazil's economy contracted sharply after 2014. A corruption scandal, Operação Lava Jato, implicated politicians across every major party, including Lula himself, who was imprisoned in 2018. His successor introduced sweeping austerity. Bolsa Familia was cut. Social spending was frozen by constitutional amendment for 20 years. The 28 million people who had been lifted out of poverty didn't stay there. By 2021, with austerity biting and COVID hitting Brazil harder than almost anywhere on Earth, extreme poverty had returned to 2004 levels. 20 years of progress, reversed in 7. And the people who reversed it faced no consequences. Because in Brazil, they never do. Here is what makes Brazil's story so maddening. Brazil has everything. The Amazon produces 20% of the world's oxygen. Brazil is the world's largest exporter of soybeans, beef, coffee, orange juice, and sugar. Second largest iron ore reserves on Earth. Significant offshore oil. Hydroelectric capacity that could power the continent. No country on Earth has a better hand to play. And yet the proceeds of that hand, the revenues from those resources, flow almost entirely to a landowning and corporate elite that has controlled Brazilian politics since colonialism. The extraction economy Portugal built in 1500 is still running. It just has better branding now. Lula returned to power in 2023. Bolsa Familia was reinstated. Social spending is rising again. There are genuine reasons for cautious optimism. But the structural problems, land concentration, tax systems that favor capital over labor, political systems captured by the same elite families for generations remain completely untouched. Brazil keeps asking the same question and getting the same answer. You can redistribute income at the edges. You cannot redistribute power without a fight that Brazil's political system has never been willing to have. The country that has everything continues to be the country that cannot share it. And until that changes, the wall between Paraisópolis and Morumbi stays exactly where it is. Most of us watching this live in countries where the gap between rich and poor is growing. Housing wealth is concentrating at the top faster than wages grow at the bottom. The people who own assets keep pulling away from the people who don't. Brazil didn't become the world's most unequal major economy overnight. It got here through centuries of small decisions that always, without exception, favored the people who already had everything. The question isn't just what went wrong in Brazil. The question is, how many of those same decisions are already being made here? If this video made you think, subscribe. Till next video drops. See you.